Right, that's the 6 o'clock gong, so 6:30 gong. God, what's wrong with me? So welcome everybody to the meeting tonight. It seems very loud. And we'll go through. Can everybody hear? Because it's sort of ringing. Okay, so our first item is apologies for absence, and we've got 4 apologies, I think.
We have. Councillors Blackmore, Gooch, Bob Hinder and Webb.
Okay, thank you. And the next one is notification of substitute members.
Councillor Perry for Councillor Blackmore.
Councillor Brindle for Councillor Bob Hinder.
Okay, thank you. Number 3, there's no urgent items tonight. You'll all be pleased to know. And notification of visiting members. I'm looking at Councillor Pearl. Let us know what you're speaking on. I suspect it's number 16. But...
Yes, Jonathan Pearl, potentially for item 16.
Okay, in that... What's that?
Did you want to move one of these?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
You need to do that.
So what I was going to suggest, since Jonathan's come for the Mellor report, which at the moment is the last item, if everybody's happy, I was going to take it further up. So we'll move it up to just after question number 10. And before the committee work programme. Yeah. Everyone happy with that? Yep. Okay. Sorry? You could do if you want, as long as we're core after that. So I don't know, to the officers, how many of us have to stay? 4. As long as there's 4 of it, me and 3 others, we can go through the rest of the meeting if you do want to go. But hopefully, the meeting won't last too long. So, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any? No. Okay. Any disclosures of lobbying tonight on the budget or anything else? No. Okay. Anything here we want to take in, in private session? No. And I've just remembered what I forgot to say, wasn't it, about the fire alarms. We're not expecting the fire alarms to go off tonight, so if they sound, Caroline, Olivia will pop down and check if there is a fire or not, and if there is, obviously, will escort us out as fast as possible. And we're being webcast tonight. So, yeah. There might be a clue there if they don't reappear. We're being webcast tonight, so I don't know if anybody else wishes to do any recordings tonight, or we'll all count on the public webcast, yeah? Okay. Okay, so number 8 is minutes of our meeting held on the 26th of November, which is pages 1 to 8. So we go through them page by page. So page 1, page 2, page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. So everyone's happy. We'll agree those are correct record. Smashing. Right, I'm not aware of any petitions being presented tonight, since there's no one from, and equally no members of the public are here. So then we go straight to what was number 16, which is the next item, which is the Mellor. So that's pages 70 to 75, and I think, John, you're going to introduce it. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. As members know, the Mellor organisers are looking to move the Mellor from Watmont Park to Moat Park. They believe that the current location is constrained in terms of what they can do creatively and in terms of the audience that they can grow. And also, because of the lack of car parking, they believe it's less accessible to people with mobility issues. They've presented a plan to us which shows that the Mellor, if relocated to Moat Park, could grow over a 3-year period. There is a gap in their funding of £5,000 for 3 years, after which that they feel that they would have grown the audience, they would have grown the sponsorship, they would have grown the stalls, all of which would pay a commission to be there, so that the Mellor will be then self-financing going forward. I think the Mellor is a long-standing event. It's been in the borough for some time. It's established part of the cultural calendar of Maidstone. I think in particular as well, it supports the council's objective around thriving place. And in particular, the focus that we have in our corporate strategy for 2019 to 24, which is enabling events which assist people in increasing their pride in communities and our environment. So the recommendation is that the committee support the relocation to Moat Park and that the funding is made available through the Kent Business Rates pool over that period of time.
Thank you for that. Jonathan, would you like to say anything at all?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll keep it brief, as I think Mr. Foster has actually made all the pertinent points, and I'll just make some sort of, ancillary points. I live next door to Watman Park. I've actually enjoyed having the Mellor there, but I'm also acutely aware of the limitations of the park. You cannot get vehicles of a certain size there to in order to move equipment onto the park. It's a bit out of the way, sadly. It has no car parking. It's not great for access and all the things that John was just saying there. I think one of the points with respect that doesn't quite come out in the officer's report, which I think is very important though, is the funding model that the Kent Equality Cohesion Council use. What they're looking for when they ask for £5,000 is that they want the money as sort of seed funding, as they say. It gives them credibility to be able to then turn around to the Arts Council and other organisations and say, look, the Borough Council backs us. It's given us this money. Now can we bid for the rest, please? I'm not sure that there are many sort of things that we can spend £5,000 on and get a £25,000 free to attend event. And that's before we even get down to sort of the ethos and cheery message of the Mellor. So please do support this.
Thank you for that. Councillor Perry and then Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chairman. I read this report. It is very clear to me, and for me, it's an absolute no-brainer. And I support what John Foster has said, and indeed what Jonathan Pearl has just said. It's strongly supported by supporters of the Mellor. This is a very important event, I think, in Maidstone, and Moat Park is the right venue for it. There's no doubt about that. And I actually think the 5K we were talking about is money well spent, actually, in terms of meeting our own strategic objectives as well. I think it's very important. It's a very clear report, and well done for drafting and making the recommendations so clear. So I would like to move that we support the recommendations as set out in the report.
With what's been said, obviously nothing else needs to be said other than the access to there via larger vehicles can be gained by going round the back of the main, what's it called? The power hub, and coming through the larger arch, because in the past I have got articulated lorries carrying fairground stuff that way when we used to have the River Festival stuff there. It's doable. I understand it's not brilliant, but it shouldn't be discounted as another venue to have other events. It is doable, and you can get vehicles and indeed food concessions and smaller rides through there. But if you hadn't have proposed or seconded, I would have been happy to have carried on. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I mean, Watman Park in our event strategy is still, I think we designated it, didn't we, at the previous meeting, to still do events in Watman Park. I think the Mellor this year, probably, almost since its inception, is going to be a really important year, because obviously I think we're leaving the European Union at the end of the week, and I think actually celebrating the diversity and being a welcoming community, I mean, it's going to be really quite important, and I think this will give an opportunity, hopefully, to bring the whole community and everybody, from whatever element of our, the various communities in Maidstone all together, and we can have a real old, good old celebration of what makes Maidstone a good place to live and how we can all be inspired by everybody else's culture. So I think it's really great, and as Jonathan said, it's only for £5,000, we're getting £20,000, we're assisting them to then go and push this event forward. And you never know, in the future this might end up being the size of Rambling Man. Anyway, if we can move to the vote, can I just see everybody in favour? Great, thank you, that's unanimous. So then if we go back to what is item 11 on the papers, which is page 9, which is our committee work programme. John.
Thanks, Chair. Not much to say other than the last item there that says Moat Park Visitor Centre and Estate Services Building. Actually, that's not correct. That should say the Bus Station Improvement Project, which I hope, which I hope to be able to bring to the committee the draft designs for the committee's approval to go out to public consultation on at the end of March. It's a bit tight, but I hope to be able to do that for you then. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for John at all? No? If not, can we agree to note the work programme? Yeah, thank you. Then the next one is number 12, report of outside bodies. There is no report before us. That takes us on to 13, which is economic regeneration and leisure, quarter-free budgets and performance monitoring 2019 to 20, which is pages 10 to 30 of your pack. So, who's doing this?
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, sorry.
This is the third update to the Economic Regeneration and Leisure Committee for the 2019-20 financial year. As with the previous two quarters this year, the report draws together the budget and the performance position in a single document. In terms of presentation, it will be a team effort. I will be covering the financial aspects of the report, whilst my colleague Claire Harvey will be taking you through the performance elements. The financial aspects of the report then are presented at Appendix 1 on pages 17 to 26. In terms of revenue, the revised revenue budget for this committee's services is showing a net underspend of 75,000 at the quarter-3 stage, with the forecast outturn for the year end being a very small underspend of £4,000. In other words, pretty much bang on budget. Table 1 on page 22 summarises the positions for all of the cost centres, whereas significant variances, both positive and negative, are presented and explained in Table 2 on page 23. The income variance at Moat Park Adventure Zone is the most significant item to note, with the shortfall in income anticipated of 53,000 by the year end. And this is due to a rent-free period being granted for the first 3 months of the year, combined with the value of the contract itself being slightly lower, I believe, than originally envisaged. With regard to capital, the programme has been reprofiled to reflect the latest position on the component schemes. As presented in Table 3 on page 25, the revised programme has spent 532,000 at the quarter-3 stage against a budget allocation of 460,000, representing a net overspend at this stage of 72,000. However, as previously reported to the committee, there is an overspend behind this of 380,000 on the Moat Park Adventure Zone. That's as a consequence of the fractured sewer that occurred in developing the site. The legal claim in respect to this matter is still ongoing. And finally, there is no significant forecast slippage for the year end, with the revised budgets expected to be spent during quarter 4. That concludes the financial aspects of the report. I will now hand you over to Claire, who will take you through the performance side of things.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, members. The report in front of members set out the key performance indicator outturns for Q3. You've got 8 KPIs that are reportable to you. 7 of them are targeted. 3 of those have missed their quarterly target by more than 10% and have been rated red. 1 indicator has missed their target by less than 10% and been rated amber, and the remaining 3 are green, and you've got, as I said, 1 contextual indicator. The number of visits to Maidstone, has missed its quarterly target by more than 10%. Although the target for this indicator is profiled to take into account seasonal variances, performance is down 15% compared to Q3 last year. The tourism manager reports that they have seen a 20% drop in referrals from the Visit Kent websites and believes that uncertainty around Brexit has impacted on tourism and that there has been a similar decline in attractions nationally. Footfall on the high street has also been rated red. Last quarter it was amber. There has been a 10% decline in footfall compared to the same period last year, and at this stage it is thought likely that the annual target will not be achieved. The Economic Development team reports that high streets nationally are seeing a decline in footfall, but generally it does appear that Maidstone has been less affected. Contacts to the visitor centre have also not achieved their quarterly target. Again, seasonality is taken into account. And also it is expected that the annual target will not be achieved for this indicator. The same influences apply to this one as for contacts to visit Maidstone, so it's all tied up with that tourism aspect, that we're seeing a slight decline in people going out places and visiting attractions, and the same way we're also seeing a similar footfall decline on our high streets. The yellow indicator was the number of users at the leisure centre. Members should be aware that certain parts of the leisure centre were closed for refurbishment during Q3, which will have had an impact on those figures. That summarises the PIs that did not achieve targets, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you both for that. I've got a couple of questions and then I'll open it up. On page 23, on your table 2, community halls, obviously it says a range of underspends. I just wondered, obviously it refers to repairs and maintenance, and I just wondered if you had any more information about where we're sort of underspending on repairs and maintenance, because that sort of worries me a bit, is if you underspend now on repairs and maintenance, as we've seen in Heather House, if you think of a gross example of what happens, you know, later on it can catch up. So I just wondered if you had got anything on that, Mark.
Yes, the corporate property team have a schedule of repairs and maintenance that they carry out on all of our properties, and what's happened in this case is that money may not have been spent this year, but that would be because the work is probably work that would be done over a 2 or 3 year cycle. So I don't think members need to be concerned that we're neglecting these premises. It's because of the profiling, which doesn't necessarily fit in with a regular annual budget. And definitely, I mean, Heather House, which you mentioned, illustrates the importance of keeping properties in good condition. And overall, I do think that our repairs and maintenance budgets are adequate to keep property in good shape.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to check that, because, I mean, as I say, we don't want to end up doing this. I'll take a minute, something which pays back later. The other thing is the market. And I know at the when we have that meeting of all the chairs and vice chairs of all committees looking at the forward plan, and I meant to mention it on the work plan, that the Loch Meadow report, which I know you're going to work on, is going to come here prior to P&R, because obviously, you know, we're a major user of the service, so we'll be looking at that later. The other one was actually just a note on page 29, when we're talking about the Visitor Information Centre. Something which actually might help the figures there in future is the fact that, I don't know if anyone's been to the museum the last week or so, is that the Visitor Information Centre is sort of being moved to the front desk where you go into the museum. And so rather than, if you like, being hidden away at the staircase halfway into the sort of bowels of the museum, it's going to be right up where people go in. So I imagine that it will probably more, be handling more queries. That should be a positive, which might help address that. So I've got Martin Cox and then John Perry.
Thank you very much for this report, both of you. I'm going to look at the key performance indicators first. It's very encouraging to see the number of students using the museum. They are very well up on there. I hope we can continue finding the funding for that. I know that it's come from an outside source in the past. The footfall actually at the visitor information / during the museum, at the museum rather, is up. So again, these are good facts. The number at the leisure centre, we've been explained possibly why that is, but I think you can see where there is a lot of interest at the museum because there's a lot of proactive work, a lot of different things come forward with the education, the new exhibits. I think this is the way to go. So perhaps, I know the leisure centre hasn't got new exhibits, but the more things they put on that are special and that revitalise people's, I'll go to the leisure centre to have an afternoon. I think the more we can be proactive in that, the better. The Moat Park Adventure Zone, with the underachieving by 53,000, I hope they're going to be continuing with this and no problem, because I think with the delay they had, they were a good deal of a distance into the year. I mean, I know we went there with one council and we had brilliant time there last year. So a lot of people have been using it. I think they haven't got a decent chunk of what a normal year would represent with these figures. So I hope we're going to be proactive and promote that part of the park, the adventure zone, in whatever way we can. I think we should be pointing at it specifically, perhaps in Insight or something like that, even incentives to get more people to go and use it. But other than that, very good report, and thank you very much.
Thank you. In terms of the adventure zone, definitely, it's every intention of the council that we're going to continue to promote that. It's a big investment. I think, obviously, there were the delays, as we all know, with the problems of the sewer break, which led to a delay in when the project started. And a lot of the underachievement of income is down to the fact that it ended up opening slightly later than planned, and therefore it missed, if you like, because I think it was of Easter, wasn't it, with the falling of the sort of Easter period. And so we had to give them a rent-free period. So there was a number of things which meant that, if you like, the first financial year, which this was, isn't a typical year. But, the council will continue to do everything we can do to clearly make it a success, and we're doing that new, the visitor centre and cafe is all about, is on track. All of that together will, hopefully, success will breed success there. So I don't think you need to worry about that, Martin.
I'm happy to propose, by the way.
Oh, the recommendations, yeah. So Martin's proposing the recommendations on page 11. That's 1, 2 and 3, isn't it? Yeah. So, John.
Just a couple of points, because it's a very good report and very clear. And it was quite interesting on back to page 23 in the table, which is again very clear. The economic development section, the savings are basically staff vacancies, and I assume you will be filling those vacancies. So in effect, and when I look at the actual savings, maybe you're going to go the other way and overspend if you fill those vacancies by looking at, it's a very crude look at the numbers, I realise that, and I haven't got the details in front of me. But I just maybe comment a little bit on that. The other thing points I'd make, back to the visitor centre again, and I take your point in the performance indicator. I take the point that it is down on target. It's always concerned me, this actually, that I still think it's in the wrong place. I still think it should actually be in the town hall. I've always thought that, and I never really figured out why it was moved, to the museum. It just doesn't seem right. You go into any French town and you want to find the set, it's always in the Hotel de Ville, isn't it? Or near. And we ought to be doing the same thing. And this is a fabulous building. any visitor to town ought to be proud to come in. So I just make that point that I think we ought to be considering that at some future date, not tonight, obviously. And this is an absolute nitpicking point, but I'm going to make it. You've got here a number of students benefiting from the museum's educational service. How do you measure benefit? I mean, I remember when I was a student, I trawled around museums, and some I benefited from, and some I jolly well didn't. I can tell you that now. And it's not just about numbers, is it? It's a bit more than that. It should be, I would have thought. Otherwise, it's a kind of, it's not giving quite the right impression to me. I know it's a bit of a nitpicking point, but all the same, thank you. I will support the recommendations, by the way, so don't worry.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. In terms of the number of students benefiting from the museum's educational service, that is a really, really old PI. So that's been around since we had BVPIs, and it was 170A or something like that. It is not physically students entering the museum. They are included in that number, but it also includes the outreach work that they do in classrooms when they go out and they run a teaching session. So if they went out and did a class to 30 kids, those 30 kids would be counted as part of that indicator. I hope that clarifies things for you.
Okay, so we've had the recommendations moved and seconded, so can I see those in favour, please? Great, that's everybody. Thank you. So we now go on to item 14, which is fees and charges on page 31 to 43. And we'll ask Chris to introduce this, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Item 14 then, fees and charges 2021. As part of the budget preparation and medium-term financial planning process, the fees and charges proposals for 2021 are being considered by the 3 service committees during January, with an overarching report that went to Policy and Resources Committee last week on the 22nd of January. This report sets out the proposed fees and charges for 2021 for the services within the remit of the Economic Regeneration and Leisure Committee. The estimated overall value of this committee's current fees and charges in 2019-20 is actually 477,000. All of these are discretionary items, meaning of course that this committee is able to determine the prices charged. The fees and charges themselves are summarised in the table on page 36. Members will note that only a very limited number of increases are proposed for 2021. Therefore, a number of price freezes are recommended. For example, at the museum, where an assessment of price sensitivity and other wider market factors has concluded that increasing prices for 2021 would be counterproductive. There are, however, some limited increases proposed, including inflationary rental increases for the business terrace expansion and an increase in boot fare charges at the market. Finally, full details of all the fees and charges can be found in Appendix 1 on pages 39 to 43. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Jill.
There seems to be one reduction of 6.67% on room hire library. Just wondered what that was. It's one, page 39, yeah, about halfway down.
So I think that was to, I'd forgotten about that little small point there. I think it's exceptionally low volume, so it doesn't really register in terms of the take-up. I think that's down to trying to promote the use of that particular facility, which is underused at the moment, so I apologise for not drawing that one out.
We can ask Victoria just to drop a quick email around, just to let us know the usage of that. So that'd be the easiest way, isn't it? Quick, short email to everybody.
I think it's almost an inevitable, looking at the room rate, that in terms of market terms, available room hire in other venues locally and here, that looks expensive. I can see why she's brought it down to make it a bit more attractive to the market.
Any other points anybody wants to raise? If not, have we got where's recommend? So the recommendation is that the proposed discretionary fees and charges set out in Appendix 1 to this report are agreed. I'm happy to propose that. Seconded. Great. Can I see those in favour? Excellent. Thank you. Which then takes us on to our last item. So ahead of our expectations, which was 7:30. So item 15, medium-term financial strategy and budget proposals, which is pages 44 to 69. So Mark, if you want to introduce that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Each year, service committees look at budget proposals for services in their respective areas before they go to Policy and Resources Committee so that it can propose a budget to Council. And this report sets out the budget proposals for this committee's area of responsibility. The background to this was set out in the medium-term financial strategy that came to this committee back in November. And the overall position that was explained in the MTFS was that we would propose essentially a standstill budget for next year, just increasing revenue and costs by inflation, and that depended on council tax increasing by 2%, but all things being equal, it meant that the budgets would essentially remain the same as this year. The only things that have changed since December is that we've had the provisional local government finance settlement, and this came out just before Christmas. It showed the position being very much as projected, so that didn't require any changes in the projections. So really all that's done here is consider existing budget savings and look at whether they are deliverable and whether there's any adjustments that are required. And you can see the results of that on page 48 and also on Appendix A on page 52. And there were a couple of savings that had originally been proposed that needed to be adjusted where they won't actually be deliverable now next year. The first one is to do with the Moat Park Cafe, where building work will take place later than expected. The other is around the museum, where we've lodged an appeal against the business rates, but we haven't had the result of that yet. Now, the solution that's proposed here is that we can use service reserves. This service gets money from the business rates pool, and there are ample reserves there to cover this off. It's just a one-year contribution to cover that shortfall of 159,000. So we end up with a balanced position, no change to the original projections. So that's the revenue position. The report also sets out details of the capital budget proposals, and the capital programme is absolutely essential for us because it's long-term investments like this that allow the council to achieve objectives like making Maidstone a thriving place. And the things that fall within this committee's remit are the work that's planned at Moat Park, the cafe and service buildings, and the museum. And so you've got the capital proposal set out here in Appendix B. And the final thing that's included in the report as Appendix C is the budget survey that we carry out every year. And I suppose the one thing I would draw to members' attention here is that when we asked residents where they thought we should be investing, the top choice was infrastructure, and it gave examples of flood prevention and street scene. And I hope you'd agree that the capital programme does actually represent significant investment in infrastructure. You can see what we're putting into Moat Park in this committee, and there's investments in other committees in other areas of infrastructure. So happy to answer any questions that you may have on the budget proposals, and Claire would be happy to answer any questions you have on the survey.
I've got one question before I open it to the floor, and it's a simple one, and it's about the town hall. On one of our members' briefing sessions we had when we've been talking about our priorities for HCL and now this committee, and I know Bob and Wendy Hinder mentioned about using the town hall at weekends for sort of lettings for sort of art fairs and antique fairs and so on. Now, whilst the town hall obviously doesn't come under this committee as such, I think it'd be worth perhaps whoever does run the town hall to consider that, because picking up what John said, the building just sits there dark all the time, and especially at weekends when we do have loads of people coming through the town. Whereas if you had events on in the town hall, I'm sure even at worst they would, you could cover your costs, and potentially it could add to an element of vibrancy in the town. And so I think it's, it need a bit of positive promotion and so on, but like people can hire Jubilee Square. I think if you could hire this room, next door, you've got a brilliant suite of rooms, which, I say it's just under, it's just a real shame when you hear at the weekend and you see the town hall, as John said, the main civic building in Maidstone, locked up like, unloved as it were. So if that could be looked into, that would be good, because, that could not necessarily cost anything and hopefully ultimately generate a bit of money to spend on arts and leisure and so on. That's my bit. Anybody, John, and then Martin.
Well, I totally agree with you, Chairman. That's, I think he's put it very well. Just a couple of things. The table on page 47, and as usual, it's a very good report, Mark, your team have done, you and yourself. This table, and I think I've seen similar versions of this, scares me. It really does scare me, because this, looking at scenario 2, the neutral one for the moment, even that, you go to 21-22, we've got some serious figures to consider, haven't we? And that's, that does worry me a lot, and it's something I think we've all got to address and think about very, very seriously. I really do. I mean, I notice your scenario 3, and the budget gap gets huge, doesn't it? Is there a particular reason why that's such an enormous jump for that? I was a bit curious. That's one of my questions, but it's not the only one.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Councillor Perry. It is a concern, and there is a lot of uncertainty, as you know, about the position from 21-22 onwards. We are hoping to get information from MHCLG in the spring, whenever the spring is. They say that they'll provide figures which will give us early indications of how things will look for next year on an authority-by-authority basis. And definitely we need to start planning then. We can't leave it till this time next year, because if the situation is as shown here, we do need to look at the measures that we would have to take. And the assumptions to do with the scenario 3, clearly the outturn is a lot worse, and this was assuming a number of adverse outcomes. So it was saying that we would collect less in business rates if there was a recession. We would have less council tax growth because there would be less house building. So a number of different situations that would arise if the economy went into reverse. At the moment, it's just about growing, but it's worth looking at the different scenarios. So that's what the adverse scenario is doing, is looking at a likely worst case for what could happen.
Thank you, Mark, for that. I mean, that's very useful. Just one other point. It's back to this. You talk about the Kent business rates, Paul. It's on 2.9, delays in savings. And I was just curious about something, because you say the business rates at the museum have been appealed, so there's no actual but the outcome is not yet known. But you are kind of assuming something, aren't you? Because you're taking this 125k. Isn't that a kind of... I'm not saying it's smoke and mirrors, that's unfair, but it's a little... it's putting caution to the wind ever so slightly, aren't you? For a finance man, that's quite something. Sorry, I'm not being critical. This is just curious.
Yes, clearly there is some risk around that. The saving does have a certain basis in that there was a case in York where a local authority museum was able to obtain a reduction in business rates. So that's the precedent that we're relying on. We've submitted an appeal, it's going through the system, it's a very long drawn out process. But you're right, I mean, it's by no means certain that we'll get that saving. Clearly, if we're unsuccessful, we'll have to look for savings elsewhere, but it does assume that we will be successful with that appeal.
There is an element of risk in that. All right, okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, John. Martin.
I can't see much of an alternative to what we're being shown here, so I really want to propose as on the papers. I think the work has been looked at by Mr. Green.
I'm happy to second that. We've got an amendment. Do you want to read out the wording?
We've got an extra. We've got an extra recommendation that this committee recommends to the Democracy and General Purposes Committee that officers look at the possibility of opening the town hall at weekends for activities such as an arts or antiques fair to increase income for the council.
Yeah.
Can I speak to that before you... I'm possibly one of the few people that have actually hired this for an antiques fair. And there was comment when I did it from members, or maybe particular members, that we don't want this sort of thing to happen in here. And also, it involves using steward staff because of the security of the safe, the silverware, the building inside. So, whilst I agree, because I tried, it is a very difficult place also for people to drop off with antique fairs. They like to have their car near, unload stuff, bring it up. So, fully encourage people being able to gain access to here. I mean, it could be a wedding venue to actually get married, not for receptions, but I would encourage that as possibly a different way of using it, because people are more, they arrive, they do this and then go, rather than they're here for 2 hours before to set up, the duration of an antiques fair and then the breaking down. I think there should be a considerable, at least 2 members of staff if we're going to do that. Also, Councillor Lewins just said, is there a disabled toilet in here? There is. Lovely. I thought there was, because we've got a lift, therefore getting people... Yeah, that's fine. So before we rush at that, I think it's, could I amend what's being said, and could we consider other things that could be done here, rather than go with the antiques fair? Because there may just be other options. I mean, there are people who do use this as a meeting room, and that is another consideration of the hiring. But I think if this was a wedding venue for just civil services, that could be possibly the most calm use.
We'll amend it so we take out where we said antiques and arts and crafts. So we just say the possibility for promoting the use of the town hall at weekends. And then they can look at all those points, and I think the idea of having civil ceremonies and weddings in anything, just as long as the place is being used by the community, it's their town hall, people should be able to use it. So, with that amendment, can I see everybody in favour? Excellent, great. That's it. So again, tonight, everything's been unanimous, which is what I like to see on this committee. So thanks everybody for coming. And it's only 20 past, so you beat the closure.